How can someone find strength amidst seemingly endless adversities? This is the question that resonates in the life of Alice, a 50-year-old woman who, after facing a series of challenges, reflects on her journey filled with struggles and triumphs. Since childhood, Alice was seen as the oldest daughter, but not in the expected way. Her mother always treated her with disdain, favoring her brother. This discrimination deprived her of education and opportunities, forcing her to work from a young age to help support the family. However, amidst all this, Alice never lost hope. At night, she studied secretly, and her determination led her to earn her high school diploma, an achievement that seemed distant when she looked at her life full of challenges. Over time, Alice married John, the son of a restaurant businessman. However, the marriage did not start the way she had dreamed. Her mother-in-law, Sarah, did not accept her and treated her with contempt, accusing her of seducing her son. Alice, despite this disdain, fought to build a life alongside John. Financial difficulties became a constant, especially when Sarah lost everything to a con artist. Alice found herself torn between her love for her daughter, Emily, and the deterioration of her relationship with John, who emotionally distanced himself and ended up getting involved with another woman. Alice's life, marked by sacrifices and challenges, began to change after the divorce. With courage and determination, she decided that she would not let circumstances define her. With a new job as a housekeeper, Alice met Robert, a kind and respectful man who helped her rediscover love and happiness. Together, they built a new life, while her ex-husband, John, faced the consequences of his poor choices, living unhappily under the shadow of his controlling mother. Emily, for her part, thrived, studying abroad, carrying with her the values that Alice had always sought to instill. Alice's journey is a story of overcoming, where every obstacle faced becomes a valuable lesson. She learns that true strength does not come from the absence of difficulties, but from the ability to rise again and move forward, even when the path seems dark. In the end, as she looks back on her life, Alice realizes that despite all the battles, she has finally found the peace and love she so desired. And thus, she becomes an example that even amid chaos, it is possible to rewrite one's own story and find happiness. Alice's life after the divorce seemed to have finally found a new path. However, challenges were not completely behind her. As she tried to rebuild her life alongside Robert, some shadows from the past began to infiltrate her new reality. The first major test came when Emily, her daughter, decided to come home during the holidays. The young woman was radiant after a semester of studying abroad, but Alice could not ignore the concern that consumed her. She feared that the relationship between mother and daughter, already fragile due to the turmoil of the divorce, could be affected by John's presence, who still insisted on interfering in Emily's life. Alice knew that Emily's visit could reopen old wounds. The young woman, in her quest to understand her roots, often seemed receptive to John's opinions. For Alice, this was a constant reminder that even with the separation, her ex-husband still played a significant role in their daughter's life. The conversations between mother and daughter, once filled with affection and support, became more cautious, as if Alice had to measure each word to avoid any misunderstanding. Meanwhile, Robert was becoming a stable anchor in Alice's life, but he was also facing his own challenges. The restaurant he managed was going through financial difficulties. The pressure to keep the business afloat affected not only his mood but also his relationship with Alice. No matter how much he tried to be supportive, the tension stemming from his worries was palpable. Alice, noticing his struggles, felt guilty for not being able to help more. This made her question her own abilities and the strength she had built throughout her life. Amid this turmoil, Sarah, Alice's mother-in-law, began making unexpected visits. Initially, she seemed to want reconciliation, appearing with gifts and trying to establish a dialogue. But the truth was that Sarah still harbored resentments and could not accept that Alice had moved on. Sarah's attempts to get close to Emily created even greater friction. Alice found herself facing a dilemma. Should she allow her daughter to have a relationship with her grandmother, knowing it could reopen old wounds? Or should she protect Emily from the emotional poison that Sarah still carried? During that time, what troubled Alice the most was the feeling of helplessness she often experienced when dealing with these family issues. Each encounter with John or Sarah made her relive the past she so desperately wanted to forget. Memories of being belittled and rejected haunted her again, and the doubt about her inner strength consumed her. There were moments when she questioned whether she was truly capable of being a good mother and partner, whether the new life she had built with Robert was as solid as it seemed. When Sarah began to openly criticize Robert, claiming he was not good enough for Alice, the tension escalated. Sarah's words struck Alice like daggers, hitting her in her most vulnerable places. She found herself torn between loyalty to her new family and the need to protect her daughter from the poisons of the past. Each day, the pressure seemed to intensify, forcing her to confront not only external challenges but also her own internal fears. Alice knew she needed to find a way to handle this situation. To do so, she decided to have an open conversation with Emily. She wanted her daughter to understand that a mother's love was not measured by the difficulties of the past, but by the strength to face those challenges together. However, this conversation was not easy. Alice hesitated, fearing that Emily might not understand her and feel divided between the two families. That night, as she prepared for the conversation, Alice reflected on all the lessons she had learned. Each difficulty had taught her about resilience and unconditional love. She knew that to move forward, she needed to confront her fears and uncertainties, even if it meant opening her heart and exposing herself to new wounds. With this in mind, Alice readied herself for the approaching challenge, determined not to let the shadows of the past prevent her from building a bright future for herself and her daughter. Alice sat at the kitchen table, her hands intertwined, staring blankly into space as memories haunted her. The conversation she planned to have with Emily weighed heavily on her shoulders like a storm-laden cloud. She needed to be clear and sincere, but the fear that her daughter wouldn't understand paralyzed her. What was going through Emily's mind? Did she feel the pain and conflicts that Alice carried? When Emily finally arrived, with her contagious sparkle and stories from the outside world, Alice felt a mix of joy and apprehension. The young woman seemed so distant from the family complications surrounding them, but each smile from Emily was tinged with a worry that Alice couldn't ignore. She needed to find a way to bring forth the feelings that tormented her, but at the same time, she wanted to protect her daughter from any shadows of the past. That night, as the moon illuminated the room, Alice sat beside Emily. The words felt stuck in her throat. "Emily," she began hesitantly, "we need to talk." The young woman looked at her with curiosity, but also with a hint of concern. It was evident she sensed the tension in the air. The conversation, which was supposed to be a moment of connection, quickly turned into a minefield. Alice tried to express her feelings about John and Sarah, but Emily's defenses rose rapidly. "Mom, you can't just expect me to cut ties with them. They're part of my life too." Emily's words hit like a blow, leaving Alice speechless. Disillusionment struck her like a punch to the stomach. She didn't want her daughter to feel divided, but at the same time, it seemed that this was the only option. In the days that followed, the tension between mother and daughter escalated. Alice noticed that Emily began spending more time with John, seeking comfort in his words. With each encounter, Alice felt more isolated and powerless. Robert tried to be a support, but the pressure from his struggling restaurant left him distant and worried. The nights were filled with uncomfortable silences, each battling their internal struggles. Meanwhile, Sarah continued to show up, more insistent than ever. The visits became frequent, and every time she opened her mouth, Alice felt rage and frustration bubbling inside her. It was as if Sarah was determined to dig a chasm between Alice and Emily, using venomous words to try to win her granddaughter's trust. Alice fought the urge to confront her, fearing it might push her daughter even further away. The breaking point came during a family dinner, where tensions became explosive. Sarah, with her incisive demeanor, made comments about Robert's life, insinuating that he wasn't the right person for Alice. "You deserve someone better," she said, looking directly at her daughter. Alice felt her heart race. This was the last straw. The words that came out of her mouth were laden with pain and frustration. "You can't decide what's best for me, Sarah. I'm an adult and I know what I want for my life." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily looked at her mother, confused and frightened. Alice realized she had crossed a line and that the battle she was waging went far beyond her own conflicts. She had to find a way to protect Emily, but she also needed to find her own voice, without letting the ghosts of the past take over. That night, as she prepared for sleep, Alice reflected on everything that had happened. What did she really want? The answer wasn't simple, and insecurity consumed her. She felt she had failed to be the mother she wanted to be, allowing conflicts to surround her. But she also knew she needed the strength to face these challenges. She couldn't let Sarah and John define her life or Emily's. Alice decided she needed a fresh start. Not just in her life, but in her relationship with Emily. She chose to step away from the arguments and focus on creating a safe and welcoming environment for her daughter. It would be a challenge, but she was determined to learn to put herself first, to respect herself. With each step she took, Alice wanted to show Emily that true strength lay not just in facing adversity, but in finding peace amidst chaos. With this new perspective, Alice prepared for a new day, resolved to face the challenges ahead, willing to show that even in the midst of pain and uncertainty, it was possible to rebuild and be reborn. And above all, that true love could overcome the shadows of the past. Alice woke up that morning with a strange feeling, as if something was about to change. The sun filtered through the curtains, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to dream of a peaceful day. However, as she descended the stairs, reality hit her like a bucket of cold water. The kitchen was empty, and the atmosphere was heavy, as if the air was laden with unspoken words and repressed emotions. She decided it was time to act. She needed to reconnect with Emily, no matter what happened. With that in mind, she began preparing breakfast, trying to create a cozy atmosphere. The smell of fresh bread and freshly brewed coffee spread throughout the house, but the joy she used to feel while doing these things was absent. The worry about what could happen as soon as Emily arrived left her restless. When her daughter appeared, Emily's expression was one of fatigue and discouragement. Alice tried to smile, but Emily's response was a brief nod, lacking enthusiasm. The young woman sat down at the table, and silence settled between them. Alice realized she needed to do more than just prepare a good breakfast. She needed to be the mother Emily deserved. "Mom, you don't need to worry so much." "I'm fine," Emily said, trying to avoid her mother's gaze. Alice could feel the resistance in her daughter's voice, as if she were trying to protect herself from something she didn't quite understand. "But I worry about you," Alice replied, her voice trembling. "I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what happens?" Emily took a deep breath as if preparing for battle. "Mom, you don't understand. It's hard for me to deal with all of this. John and Sarah, they are part of my life. And you can't just expect me to choose a side." Alice felt a knot form in her stomach. It was as if every word from Emily was a knife, cutting deeper into her hopes. But before she could respond, the phone rang, interrupting the growing tension. Alice answered, and the voice on the other end left her paralyzed. It was an old friend of John's, announcing that he had been in a car accident. The news hit like a bombshell. Alice felt the ground open up beneath her feet. John, with whom she had fought so hard to distance herself, was hurt. Confusion and fear surged within her as her mind tried to process the gravity of the situation. What would this mean for Emily? She needed to go to the hospital. But what if this pushed her daughter further away? Alice looked at Emily, who was now standing, pale and trembling. The expression of despair on her daughter's face made her realize that, no matter how difficult it was, the truth was that they needed to face this together. "Emily," she began, her voice now filled with new determination, "we need to go to the hospital. John is hurt." Emily's reaction was instantaneous. She grabbed her bag hurriedly, her eyes shining with concern. Alice felt the weight of her own doubts and fears, but had to set them aside. At that moment, what mattered most was John's health and Emily's well-being. The two rushed to the car, the atmosphere heavy with tension and anxiety. As they drove, Alice tried to gather her thoughts, grappling with her own confusion. There was something deeply ironic about how a crisis could simultaneously bring people closer and drive them apart. What she truly wanted was for Emily to feel safe and loved, regardless of what happened with John. When they arrived at the hospital, the atmosphere was oppressive. The fluorescent lights reflected the worry on the faces of those waiting. Alice held Emily's hand, which was trembling. They were together, and that was all that mattered. The wait felt endless, and every passing minute was torture. Finally, a doctor came out looking for them. "He's stable but still needs care. You'll be able to see him soon," the doctor said, and the relief that washed over Alice was almost palpable. However, Emily's expression was mixed. She was relieved, but there was still a shadow of conflict in her eyes. As they waited, Alice realized that the situation had given her a new perspective. She couldn't control everything, but she could be present. Pain and uncertainty were parts of life, and what truly mattered was how they dealt with it. Alice remembered that she needed to be the mother Emily needed, not just in moments of joy but also in difficulties. When they finally entered the room and saw John lying in bed, bandaged, Alice's heart tightened. But looking at Emily, who walked to her father with tears in her eyes, she felt a new bond forming there. The pain, the confusion, all of it could be faced together. And somehow, this difficult moment was creating space for a new beginning, not just for Emily and John, but for herself as well. Alice realized that, despite the failures and disappointments, life went on, and perhaps this was the first step toward rebuilding their relationships. From that day forward, she would commit to facing challenges with courage, learning to love herself and her daughter, even when life became difficult. The journey wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face it head-on. Alice sat in a chair beside John's hospital bed, watching him, pale and immobilized. Emily stood, with her hand on the bed, looking at her father with a mixture of love and fear. The scene was a brutal reminder of the fragility of life. Alice felt a wave of emotion, but also a growing determination. This was a moment that required strength, not just from her, but from the whole family. The following days were an emotional roller coaster. John was recovering, but his presence in the hospital brought to light issues Alice preferred to avoid. What would his recovery mean for the family dynamic? As she tried to stay strong for Emily, she realized that the young woman was in constant internal conflict. The mother-daughter relationship was still fragile, and Alice's concern about how this would affect Emily made everything more complicated. "He will be okay, won't he?" Emily asked one morning, her gaze fixed on the window, where the sun shone but couldn't penetrate the cloud of uncertainty in her heart. The daughter's voice was so soft that Alice almost didn't hear her. "Yes, dear. The doctor said he is recovering, but it may take some time," Alice replied, trying to sound confident. Deep down, she felt insecure. What would happen when John came home? How would she and Emily adapt to this new reality? That day, Alice decided she needed a moment alone to reflect. She left the room and sat on a bench in the hospital corridor. The movement of people around her felt distant, as if everything was happening in a movie. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to find clarity amidst the whirlwind of emotions. Alice remembered how life had been before John and Emily became embroiled in such a deep conflict. There had been laughter, family dinners, and simple moments that now felt so far away. The pain of separation made her realize that, regardless of their disagreements, family would always be a strong bond. But how could she rebuild that? While she was thinking, a nurse passed by and, noticing Alice's expression, stopped. "Are you okay?" the nurse asked with a gentle look. "I'm trying to figure out what to do next," Alice replied, feeling vulnerable. "The situation with my daughter, it feels like everything is falling apart." The nurse nodded, understanding the weight of the words. Sometimes, life puts us in difficult situations. The important thing is that you are together. This can be a new beginning, even if it feels scary. Alice smiled slightly. The nurse was right. Although the situation with John was challenging, it could be an opportunity to heal the wounds that existed between her and Emily. When she returned to the room, she found Emily sitting next to John, holding her father's hand and whispering words of comfort. A small smile formed on Alice's lips. That scene was a good sign. In the following days, Alice began to find ways to reconnect with Emily. They talked more, tried to share their feelings about John, and it helped them understand each other. With each small conversation, Alice felt she was getting closer to her daughter in a new and healthier way. But there were still moments of tension. Emily continued to grapple with confusion about her loyalties, and Alice knew she would have to be patient. One night, while they were together in the hospital, Alice decided it was time to open her heart. "Emily, I know the situation with your father is complicated. I never wanted you to feel pressured to choose a side," Alice said, her voice trembling. Emily looked at her mother, her eyes full of tears. "I just want things to go back to how they were, Mom. I miss you in all of this." Alice leaned in and held her daughter's hand. "I miss you too. But we need to find a way to move forward together. No matter what happened, you will always be my daughter, and I will always be here for you." The conversation was a turning point. Trust began to be restored between them. They laughed, cried, and discovered they had more in common than they thought. Alice realized that each small interaction was helping to heal the wounds that had accumulated over time. However, new challenges lay ahead. With John recovering, the family dynamics would change again. Alice knew she would need courage to face the coming days when old tensions might resurface. But now, she felt better equipped to handle it. The love she felt for Emily and the new connection they were forming were her best weapons. From that moment on, Alice made a promise to herself and her daughter not to let challenges tear them apart again. Life was unpredictable, but together, they would face any obstacle that came their way. And perhaps, just perhaps, This could be the beginning of a new chapter, one in which pain transformed into strength and disagreement into understanding. Alice watched Emily as the young girl tried to find balance amidst the whirlwind of emotions surrounding John's recovery. The hospital had become a new temporary home, a place where hopes and fears coexisted. For Alice, the internal struggle was palpable. She wanted to protect her daughter, but she also needed to confront her own insecurities and the weight of the past. In the days that followed, Alice realized that her confidence was being tested at every moment. She felt vulnerable and often lost. John's fragility made her reflect on her own vulnerabilities. She had always considered herself strong, but as her conversations with Emily deepened, she began to realize that strength was not just about enduring but also about accepting help and opening up to others. On a sunny afternoon, as the leaves of the trees swayed gently, Alice decided she needed a fresh start. During a light conversation between mother and daughter, Alice smiled and said, "Let's do something different today. How about a picnic in the park? Just the two of us?" Emily hesitated, but the idea of escaping the reality of the hospital excited her. Alice quickly organized everything. They prepared sandwiches, fruits, and some drinks. When they arrived at the park, the fresh air and sunlight brought new energy to the environment. Alice sat in the shade of a tree while Emily wandered a bit, exploring the space. As she watched her daughter, Alice felt a tightness in her heart. It was a reminder that despite the challenges, there was beauty and simplicity in shared moments. The need for a fresh start was not just about John. It was about rebuilding the connection with Emily, and for that, Alice needed to set aside her insecurities. "You know, whenever I'm with you, I feel like I can face anything," Alice said, breaking the silence. Emily looked at her mother, surprised, but smiled. "I feel that too. Sometimes we just need some time together." Emily's revelation brought relief to Alice. They talked about memories, dreams, and hopes. With each exchanged word, the tension that had once existed between them began to dissipate. Alice realized that by opening up, she was not only strengthening herself but also the relationship she had with her daughter. However, reality could not be ignored. With John coming home, a new wave of uncertainty washed over Alice. How could she maintain this new connection with Emily, even in the face of old conflicts potentially resurfacing? Worry consumed her, but at the same time, there was a newfound understanding within her. Alice began to apply the lessons she had learned. She understood that success was not just about solving problems but about cultivating relationships. The richness she sought was not material but emotional. What mattered was the connection she was forming with Emily, the friendship developing between them, and the promise of a more united future. When John finally returned home, Alice was ready. She had prepared for the challenges ahead, armed with the strength she had discovered in herself and in her daughter. With an open heart, she encouraged Emily to express her feelings, even if it meant confronting the pain of the past. Together, they created a safe space for everyone to share their emotions. The process was not easy. There were days when the tension was palpable and words seemed hard to find. But Alice remembered what the nurse had said about new opportunities, and instead of retreating, she moved forward. With patience and love, she helped Emily voice her concerns about her father, opening doors to conversations that had previously seemed impossible. Over time, the wounds began to heal. The new family dynamic was filled with challenges but also with growth. Alice felt more confident in herself and in her relationship with her daughter. The transformation began to happen when she realized she was not alone on this journey. Alice learned that vulnerability was not a weakness but a strength. By allowing Emily to see her insecurities, She not only became a role model but also a support. Through the difficulties, the bond between mother and daughter flourished, and both discovered that together they were stronger than they could have ever imagined. As time passed, Alice and Emily became a team. The love and understanding they cultivated amid adversity became the foundation of their new life. They learned to embrace challenges, celebrate small victories, and find beauty in the fragility of life. Thus, the journey of overcoming was not just about John but about the transformation and growth they both experienced, creating an unbreakable bond that would sustain them through any storm. Alice sat in the living room, her heart racing. The sound of the key in the lock echoed through the house, and she knew that moment had arrived. John had returned from the hospital, but the atmosphere was charged with expectations and uncertainties. Emily, by her side, wore a mixed expression of anxiety and hope. It was time to confront what they had tried to avoid, the conversations that could change the family dynamic forever. When John entered, his gaze met Alice's. She could see his fragility, but also the determination to reclaim what they had lost. "Hi, love," he said softly. The longing and pain were present in every word. Alice took a deep breath, trying to gather her courage. "We need to talk," she declared, her voice firm but trembling. Emily nodded, her gaze fixed on her father as if waiting for something she didn't quite know how to articulate. John sat down, and silence settled in the room, heavy and full of meaning. Alice looked at her daughter, who seemed ready to speak but hesitant. The courage she had cultivated over the past weeks urged her to take the first step. "Emily has some things she would like to share with you," Alice said, encouraging the girl. With a trembling voice, Emily began to speak. "Daddy, I was scared you wouldn't come back. I didn't know what to do. I felt like everything could fall apart, and I didn't want to lose you." Tears welled up, and she struggled to continue. "I just wanted you to know how important you are to me." The sincerity of Emily's words struck John like a bolt of lightning. His eyes filled with tears as he heard his daughter's pain. He leaned forward, emotion overflowing. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm scared too. But I'm here now, and I want us to get through this together." Alice watched the scene unfold, her heart tight but also relieved. What had once seemed an insurmountable abyss was beginning to close. John, sensing the fragility of the situation, found his courage. "I know I made wrong choices. I didn't want this to tear us apart. I want to be a better father, a better husband. And I need you both for that." John's declaration brought a new air to the room. Alice felt that, finally, they were on the right path. "We need to be honest with each other, even when it's hard," she said. "Let's create a safe space to share our feelings, without fear of judgment." Alice then remembered the lessons she had learned. Vulnerability is a strength, and communication is key. Together, they began to talk about their fears, insecurities, and hopes. Each exchanged word was like a stone removed from a previously blocked path. The wounds started to heal before their eyes. The conversation deepened, and John revealed his own emotional struggles. He spoke about the fear of not being enough, of not being able to be the father Emily deserved. Alice realized that by sharing his weaknesses, John was opening himself up for reconnection. The tension that had previously dominated the atmosphere began to dissipate, giving way to a deeper understanding. The climax of that afternoon was not just about overcoming a challenge but about building a new foundation. The family was coming together again, and each of them was willing to make sacrifices to make that happen. Alice and Emily, with tears in their eyes, realized that love could heal, and that vulnerability, far from being a burden, was, in fact, the key to a stronger future. As the sun set, casting a soft light into the room, Alice felt a wave of gratitude. She had learned that true treasures were not material possessions, but rather the relationships built with love and respect. The journey of overcoming had transformed into a life lesson. Together, they were ready to face the future, knowing that friendship and love were the forces that would unite them in any storm. And so, with a new semblance of hope, the family began to rewrite their story, one day at a time. After the intense dialogue that turned the room into a space of renewal, Alice felt that, despite the still open wounds, something precious had been gained. The conversation had marked a turning point, and now each of them needed to deal with the consequences of that emotional openness. In the days that followed, the family routine began to change. John made an effort to be more present. He woke up earlier, helped Emily with her homework, and whenever he could, prepared breakfast. These small gestures, which had previously seemed insignificant, were now meaningful. Alice observed with a mix of hope and caution. It was a step, but there was still much to be done. One morning, as the sun streamed through the window, Alice sat at the kitchen table with Emily. The girl, now more confident, seemed more at ease to open up. "Mom, do you think Dad will be able to be different?" The question was simple, but it carried immense weight. Alice smiled, although a part of her was still hesitant. "I think he is trying, Emily. We are all trying. The important thing is that we are here for each other." Emily nodded, but a look of concern still lingered on her face. What if he goes back to being like before? Alice felt her heart tighten. Change takes time. We can't guarantee that everything will be perfect, but we can strive together. What matters is that we are willing to talk about it. The open dialogue between mother and daughter became a ritual, and with each conversation, Alice felt that trust was slowly solidifying. However, the weight of the past was still present. At night, as she prepared for bed, Alice reflected on everything they had lived through. She knew that the pain would not disappear immediately, but John's willingness to try and Emily's desire to connect were signs that they were on the right path. A few days later, John and Alice decided to have a conversation alone. It was an opportunity to discuss the challenges still ahead. John was determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past, but he also expressed his insecurities. "I don't want you or Emily to feel like you need to protect me. I want to be honest about my struggles," he said, his voice trembling. Alice, touched by his sincerity, replied, "I have my fears too. Sometimes I wonder if I am strong enough to handle all of this. But we need to support each other." The words brought relief, and the connection between them strengthened even more. It was a mutual commitment to face the challenges together. As time passed, moments of vulnerability became more frequent. They began to create new family rituals, such as game nights and park outings. These simple activities helped solidify the new dynamics. Emily's laughter echoed through the house, and John seemed lighter, as if the weight of the past was being slowly lifted. One of those nights, while playing games, Emily cast a keen look at her father. "Dad, do you feel different now?" John paused for a moment, reflecting. "Yes, I do. I'm trying to be more present and to understand better what you need from me. And more importantly, I'm learning to open up. It's hard, but it's important." Alice watched the scene, a smile forming on her lips. She realized that love and honesty were creating a safe space for everyone. The conversations, once feared, were now becoming moments of connection and understanding. The family was rising again, not just as a group but as a united team. As the months went by, Alice noticed that the emotional wounds, while still there, were beginning to heal. The pain of the past had not disappeared, but now there was a new light illuminating the path ahead. They learned that vulnerability was not a sign of weakness, but a bridge to a deeper understanding. Over time, Alice and John discovered that they could talk about their feelings without fear of retaliation. They were creating a new pattern of communication, and this was reflected in how Emily interacted with them. Trust was being restored, and the family, though marked by challenges, was growing stronger each day. And so, together, they continued to write their story, one day at a time, with the certainty that, despite the difficulties, love was the force that would unite them in any storm that might arise. As time passed, Alice and John became living examples that transformation was possible, even in the face of difficulties. The journey they had traversed together was not easy, but the small daily victories were creating a new pattern for the family. Alice looked at John and saw a man who, little by little, was learning to open up, to share his vulnerabilities, and to confront his insecurities. He was not the same man as before. He had become someone more attentive and present, who understood that true love required effort and commitment. Alice also noticed a change in herself. The conversations that once made her anxious now made her feel strong and confident. She learned that talking about feelings was not a sign of weakness, but an essential step toward healing. Her relationship with Emily blossomed, and together, mother and daughter discovered a new level of connection. The girl, now more confident and secure, was a reflection of the work they were all doing to understand each other better. On a sunny afternoon, while playing in the park, Alice realized how far they had come. Emily's laughter, which had previously been interrupted by moments of tension, now filled the air with lightness. John was beside them, participating in the games and making faces that elicited laughter from their daughter. It was in that moment that Alice realized they had not only overcome obstacles but had risen again as a stronger family. The love that had once seemed fragile now shone with a new strength. Over time, they learned to celebrate the small victories. A family dinner became a special event where they shared their triumphs of the day, no matter how simple they were. Emily would say, with sparkling eyes of pride, that she managed to help a friend at school. John would share with a satisfied smile that he finished that project that had been driving him crazy. Alice, in turn, talked about how she was feeling more connected and happy. These exchanges of experiences strengthened the bonds between them. Amid these moments, the family began to realize that true success was not in avoiding problems, but in facing them together. Each one brought their vulnerabilities to the table and found strength in unity. They learned that love and understanding were the most powerful tools they had. The life lessons they learned along the way were deep and transformative. Alice reflected on how the journey of overcoming had changed her life. She realized that to achieve something meaningful, it was necessary to go through challenges and open oneself to the new. Each difficult conversation had been an opportunity to grow, not just as individuals, but as a family. What once seemed like a burden had now become a source of wisdom and love. With a smile on her face and a light heart, Alice felt grateful for everything they had experienced. The past still existed, but no longer as a weight. Instead, it was a part of who they were now. Together, they were ready to face any storm, united by love and the commitment to support one another. And so, the story of Alice, John, and Emily became a testament that healing is possible when vulnerability is embraced and understanding is sought. Each day was a new chance to love and learn. If you also have a story about overcoming challenges or moments of transformation, share it in the comments. Your experiences can inspire others to face their own journeys. Don't forget to like and subscribe, as together we can create a space for support and learning. Let's spread this message of love and hope,